And action. Deep breath. Welcome everybody to the Amazing.io Winning with WebOps webinar. I'm in conversation today with Toby Bellwood, the Lagoon product lead, and Blaise Kay, a Lagoon developer experience engineer. Toby was the tech lead for GovCMS, which is the whole of government web platform built on Drupal and hosted on Lagoon. Prior to that, Toby was the lead for the Australian government's open data platforms. So Toby has broad experience running and maintaining hundreds of high-profile sites, serving hundreds of millions of page views on the Lagoon platform. Before moving to Amazing.io, Blaise helped form and shape the Amazing Labs global maintenance team, which is responsible for around 100 active web projects. So both Toby and Blaise have experienced the pleasures and pains of building and maintaining large numbers of active web projects. So today we hope to share some of those experiences and how they inform Amazing.io's open source WebOps platform. To get us started, perhaps to lay some foundations for the rest of the conversation, Toby, could you briefly explain Lagoon and the Amazing.io platform and how that kind of relates to this concept of WebOps?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Brian. So we tend to think of where the software and hardware stack sits. We've got those key cloud providers, the AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and various other on-prem or third-party hosters. On top of there, one of the key tenets of WebOps, of cloud native, is Kubernetes. Kubernetes is becoming the dominant standard in web hosting now. So what Amazing.io and Lagoon have done is built a stack on top of Kubernetes. So we've got Lagoon that sits there, and that does a lot of the automation of Kubernetes, but it does a lot of the automation up the stack as well, so that your applications, your PHP, your Node, Ruby, Python, etc., and the applications that are built on them, so that's Drupal, it's WordPress, it's Django, it's Laravel. The Lagoon acts as that integration layer between Kubernetes and between your applications, and then rounding off your typical sort of WebOps stack is the CDN, the WAF, the part that actually distributes your content out to your users. So when we talk about Lagoon or Amazing.io, we talk about basically Lagoon is the stack above Kubernetes, and Amazing.io is the entirety of the offering, from automating the infrastructure at the very bottom level to automating the WAF and CDN at the top.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I think that laid some good foundation of what an open source WebOps stack looks like and what ours looks like, at least. So perhaps with that background information, Blaise, how would you define this term WebOps, like what it means for you coming from a web application development background?
Right. WebOps. Okay, so we think of WebOps in at least two ways. The first way being from a kind of technical perspective, and the other one from an organizational perspective. I'll speak primarily to the technical perspective. If we think about what is required these days for delivering web-based solutions, it's no longer just FTPing up a PHP file onto an Apache server and going. Back in the 2000s, that was pretty much the state of the art. There were other options available. There was Tomcat, there were ASP.NET and so on. However, PHP really won back then because it was so simple. And from a web perspective, or from a technical perspective, we're really thinking of WebOps as a way of abstracting away the technical requirements that we have that are really required for being competitive these days. Metrics, automatic deployment of sites, maintaining continuous uptime, scaling. All of these things are extremely complicated. At least they are for me. I'm sure other people find it as complicated as well. And the WebOps platforms that we're speaking about, particularly Lagoon in this case, really provide the abstraction for all of those complicated things for developers like myself and like the teams that I've worked with, to make it easy for them to deploy those, to make use of those functionalities without having to actually necessarily learn all of it. So that's really how I would see WebOps in the way we're speaking about it now.
Awesome. And so you mentioned two aspects there, right? You mentioned the technical aspect and then the organizational aspect. Maybe Toby, I can kind of pick on you here a bit. How do you see the WebOps organizational aspect playing out? Like, what is the organizational aspect? And maybe, I mean, I understand it as relating a little bit to, or in fact, quite intimately to the original DevOps movement. Maybe you can speak to a bit about that and how you've seen that being adopted in organizations.
I think DevOps was, and still is, a very strong force in bringing the various teams needed to run an application together. What we're seeing with WebOps is that extension has gone beyond. We've seen DevOps has become DevSecOps, but rather than becoming DevSec, sales, MAR, business, ops, WebOps is a much better term for everybody that needs to sit around the delivery of particularly a web presence. And we're seeing that the existing hosting structure, the legacy hosting, is still very much in that DevOps mold. It's still servers and applications, and you've still got the IT guys. You still need to go to someone else when you want intelligence or information. You've still got a large swathe of people who don't have regular day-to-day access to the underlying tooling. With WebOps, you're providing a set of tooling that not just satisfies your dev and your ops needs, but you've got security teams, you've got site reliability engineers, you've got project managers, you've got program managers, you've got additional stakeholders, you've got all these people who you're trying to serve. And WebOps packages a lot of this stuff up nicely and puts the right information in the right people's hands. So we're talking about scaling. Site reliability engineers are really keen to see that their applications are performing, that at the back end, at the Kubernetes end, that they're scaling to meet traffic. They've got high traffic events. They're really keen to see that they've got optimized caching at the front end. You've got your security team who want to know that your underlying infrastructure is secure and it's patched and you're not running applications that are vulnerable. You've got project managers who want to know how many sites have we got, how many environments have we got, how many blah, 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 blah. With the traditional legacy hosting model, you still needed to go and pester someone from the IT operations team to say, hey, can you tell us how many hits we got on our traffic last month? Like, we've got Google Analytics and stuff, but being able to get richer information relied on teams to run reports for you. What I see WebOps is you're putting more tooling in more people's hands so that you don't need one person to run a report for you. You can get the information you need yourself. And a lot of the work that we've done in Lagoon and Amaze.io has been around this. Well, I think we'll probably cover this a little bit later, just how we help those various users get their specific needs met. Awesome.
I mean, I see in the, when I'm talking to people about Amaze.io and about our platform and about Lagoon, the word modern comes up a lot. And I guess you've kind of covered this now, and so we'd see the difference between a legacy hosting platform and this modern WebOps hosting platform really being the creating access to information, creating independence that people can, the person who needs to do something or achieve something or get access to information can do that without having to go via several different layers, right? Would you say that would be accurate? And is that how you see the word modern coming into this?
I think definitely computer literacy, web literacy, it's predominant across all disciplines now. Gone are the days when you got someone else to do it. So I think modern is reaching out and giving users the tools they need. I think one of the other important aspects of a modern platform is that it should be multi-purpose. It should be capable. It should be able to handle more than the single tool. Blaze talked about uploading a PHP to an Apache server, which is great if you're running in a PHP website. But if you're running, the organization may be running multiple sites, it may be running multiple applications. Having one platform that can host all of those is a far more modern approach, rather than building these legacy stacks of, this is our Drupal website, this is our WordPress hosting, this is where we host our static sites. A modern platform should be able to handle all of that at the same, using the same tooling, using the same underlying infrastructure.
Absolutely.
I would also say that in terms of modern, I would also say like a platform that supports modern development practices, and not merely just modern, but also potentially evolving development practices is something that you want to be able to support. So I mean, we can talk about it in terms of technologies. We can also talk about it in terms of process. And I think that a modern WebOps platform is something that really can support these evolving standards.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Actually makes me think of something, Blaise, like if we go from the organizational aspect of WebOps back to the technical aspect, I know you and your team are working on tooling that goes around Lagoon, like Lagoon Sync is something that jumps into my mind. I guess that's another aspect of the technical side, right? Is creating these tools that allow you to do common things that would be, traditionally different from, syncing something simple like syncing uploaded files between Drupal sites was done in one way, and between WordPress sites is done another way, and between Laravel sites would maybe be a third way. And I guess that's another part of this, right? And that's where the abstraction layer comes in. Is there any other like abstraction layers that you would speak to that on the technical side that the WebOps platform is bringing in that maybe we didn't traditionally see with legacy hosting infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely. I think that what you've kind of identified there is really at the heart of what we do in the Lagoon team, right? Is that we need to think of useful general abstractions for a whole range of clients. Mm-hmm. What is going to work for the greatest range of people and yet still be extremely useful. This runs through our entire platform, from the way that we can specify what the project looks like. We have a lot of flexibility in terms of that. There are a few files that you specify, if you want to read a server, if you're connecting to a database, if you want to varnish in front of something. This is all specified in a very generic way, as well as the way that we approach projects that have actually been deployed on our system. We have an entire reporting system that is generic enough to really work on anything, and provide like data about software bill of materials, what's actually running in your platform or on your platform. What is what version of Node are you running? What packages are inside of that Node, or Python, or really anything. This would not be possible really in previous iterations of web hosting platforms. So yeah, that's the kind of technologies that we're working on at the moment.
Excellent, that's great. So Toby, we've spoken about kind of the organizational aspect and the technical aspect. So you spend a lot of time talking to people who are either running Lagoon themselves, or they are, or you're speaking to our teams internally who are running it. And then you also speak to, our different customers who are leveraging the platform in some way, shape, or form. I'm interested to know, like, who do you see as the customers that are, or the people that are adopting this approach, both like kind of technically, organizationally, what's it looking like?
The main people that are going to benefit from Lagoon are people that are running multiple sites. So we've got some customers who have one site or two sites. We've got other customers who've got tens, dozens, hundreds. Our largest site holdings at Amaze.io are into the hundreds of sites. And maybe all Drupal, there might be Drupal and Laravel, there might be 3 different kinds of Drupal. There might be some that have a Solr backend, there might be some that have Elasticsearch. So if you've got a large disparate collection of sites, Lagoon is a really good choice. A, because the development, deployment, tooling procedure is exactly the same across all of your sites. You don't need to learn additional platforms, additional logins. You don't need to maintain different software stacks. People that are supporting their own customers. So we've also got a number of customers, both of Amaze.io and of Lagoon, who sit in between the developing partners and the infrastructure providers. So they have partner networks where they've got visibility into the sites that are being developed, although they're not necessarily developing those sites themselves. And again, that's where the observability and the insights come. They can see that the developing partners are doing a good job. They're building their sites, they're meeting their targets, the agile principles are alive and well. They can see work in progress. They can get a clear understanding of current state. If you've got if you've got those multiple developer teams as well, because you're using a common tooling, those developer teams can work on multiple projects at once. We've seen in some of our larger customers that one developer team might be working on multiple sites, and with permissions controls, with access controls, they can do that. They can operate on multiple sites. They can operate in one of the more shared environments. They can operate for different partners on different sites, on the same infrastructure, on the same tooling. So we see that as being a really good fit for someone who wants to build, maintain, support multiple sites. That's where Lagoon and its services really shine.
And I think that from just following up from that, Toby, you mentioned the agile principles, and this is something that I think is like baked into the platform, from the get-go. Just the way that you can spin out new environments, test things out, test out features without much overhead at all. It's really just a case of often creating a new branch in a Git repository, and then suddenly you have a new environment. This is not something that would previously be able to be done with a standard web hosting platform. This just speaks to exactly the agile kind of way of approaching things.
What's cool about that is the agile approach goes beyond, or goes further than the agile approach to projects, doing initial developments and stuff. It actually takes that agile approach further into the other spaces like site reliability engineering that Toby mentioned earlier, like security. Security and project maintenance becomes possible to do in an agile way because of the ability to spin up development environments quickly and feature environments and those sorts of things. I won't get into maybe a bit of specifics around something you mentioned, Blaze. You mentioned the kind of insights and reporting, part of the WebOps platform. This is something we've both got. We had a lot of experience in the global maintenance team at Amazy Labs, where we had the kind of 100-odd sites that we were trying to keep maintained and secured and managed, and that was kind of pre-Lagoon Insights and the reporting layer days. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the kinds of information, kinds of tooling that's being built, kinds of information that's being captured, and how that's going to be and is already being bubbled up to WebOps teams.
Absolutely. I think that the clearest kind of use case that we see most often is where you're running, maybe a dozen sites, and you want to know really what are the modules that are running on this site. Let's say we're interested in knowing about outdated modules, or if we're looking for a specific module or version of, say, Drupal that is exploitable. Having that information available through the call to an API or through the UI, rather than having to actually SSH into an environment or look at a package.json file or something like that, or composer.json file. I think that that's a really powerful functionality that we provide. And again, that's the agile part of things, right? Mm-hmm. We are able to respond in an agile way to outdated versions, security issues, and so on. And that's all built and baked into the system at the moment. We get lists of the packages that are installed on everything, and they're available for you to report on. And we've had clients that have built further reporting layers on top of that. They drive a lot of their business decisions based on these facts that are flowing through the system. They didn't need to build anything other than a simple interface into systems that we provide to them, out of the box. So yeah, that's the kind of things that we're seeing emerge from practice.
So that's right. I mean, you mentioned the business value there. Let's speak a little bit to that, because I think we've spoken about the organizational aspect, we've spoken about the technical aspect. There's obviously a business or commercial aspect to all of this. So perhaps to Toby, we can see how this can address developer challenges or developer pain or make developers' lives easier. And, we can maybe extend that to technical project managers and even designers, from more technical, being able to see what they're building. What about from a business value perspective? How do you see this being a valuable addition to a business that is in the web space in some way?
I think like the core principle is we've always pitched WebOps as being for developers. A large tenet of what we've done over the years at Amazing.io has been sort of built by developers for developers. But we've got to realize that there's more than just developers out there, and the WebOps principle really embraces the entirety of the team. The business value of providing more people with the information, with the platform, with the tools they need is the ability to get things done. Blaze was just talking about knowing if your Drupal sites are vulnerable, rather than the first guy on deck on a Friday morning saying, oh, Drupal security vulnerability, are we vulnerable? And waiting for the first developer to stroll in at 11 a.m. They're able to find that information out for themselves. They could tool, they could write a report, they could collect something, they could go, okay, I know that we've got 3 sites that we need to worry about. The immediacy of the information, the ability to act instantly. There's also a lot of reduction in effort that we see, and that's by having common platforms, common tools. If you are looking at a large organization, being to get developers up to speed on 3 different deployment stacks, running 2 different tools locally, building sites in 3 different ways. We all know that context switching is the enemy of efficiency, but we all have to accept that context switching is going to happen. The less time we can spend transitioning between those spaces, the easier it is for people to be more productive more quickly. So if a developer's managing 3 or 4 or 5 different websites, if they can manage those 3 or 4 or 5 different websites the same way, and it's as easy as opening up a different code editor window, there's going to be a massive gain there, rather than having to, like, I used to work in the days when you had to switch machines occasionally to develop on a different system. But certainly having to power down stacks and power up stacks, it's such a time kill in switching. Whereas if you tell me that I need to update something on the website, I can open that website on my local, I can make the change, I can test it locally, I can push that change up and off. If I know what that change is and it's dead simple, that might be 5 minutes. It might take 5 minutes from you telling me something is changing to me testing it locally to it deploying to a test or a feature branch, or if you're particularly brave, just YOLO it straight into prod. But that's 5 minutes. It's not having to spend half an hour. It's not having to spend an hour building and rebuilding and taking things down. So there's a real opportunity there. The cooperation between the various entities as well, being able to, we talked about having to go to the IT team to generate reports for you. Now, if we put the ability to generate the reports in more people's hands, it doesn't need to be your senior DevOps engineer that does a report for you. You can get anybody who's got the right level of access to the system can learn how to generate those reports, how to create those artifacts.
So you've mentioned the IT team there, and I mean, there's still people running these infrastructure and these stacks, right? So sometimes it might be us, hosting it could be an IT team. What is this kind of approach? What does it mean for IT teams and tech teams that are not so much responsible for the day-to-day developer now, pushing something up to the cloud because this is working, but somebody still has to manage the underlying infrastructure, right? What are you seeing changing in IT environments in the organizations that you work with?
I think certainly my experience with the Australian government was that every government agency has an IT team, it has a web team, and the IT teams are traditionally spending most of their time and attention on the internal corporate systems. They're building their Active Directories, they're working on their SharePoints, they're doing all the stuff to keep the entire organization running. And the public face of the organization was often an afterthought. In some cases, some agencies did it really, really well. But there was more than one occasion where we came across agencies whose website was hosted on a server somewhere in the data center. They didn't really know where it was. And the only way they could get stuff done was by finding the right person. So being able to provide a common platform alleviates the burden from some of those IT teams, the not having to support the website, not having to make sure it's backed up, not having to make sure that the logs are going, make sure that the vulnerabilities are patched. Being able to outsource some of that effort to a number of the organizations that we used to deal with, and the ability to share that burden and that knowledge between multiple agencies was one of the primary drivers behind the GovCMS program in its early days. What it allowed agencies with smaller resource pools to do. Some government departments have fewer than 20 employees. Some have more than 10,000. But by having a platform that anybody can use without needing the deep IT skills meant that those teams could train their communications staff in website management and maintenance. They didn't need to know about DevOps. They didn't need to know about backup schedules, about log rotations. They didn't need to know about vulnerability patching. You can abstract that away and they can concentrate on writing content. And there were a number of customers who wouldn't make a code change for their website year on year. They didn't need a resource that could do that. If they needed a resource that could go and update, add more boxes to the front page, or could change the color of headers and footers, they can get an external resource to come in and do that on a super small engagement. They didn't need to maintain those resources in-house full time.
Got you. That's super interesting. So it is actually changing the IT landscape, specifically as it relates to, you know, separating out the IT stuff that is the day-to-day business from the web front end and the, you know, in the government world at least.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so we've spoken now quite a lot about our platform and WebOps in general. Obviously, we've got the Amazy.io web platform. That the easiest way to adopt it is, you know, kind of point your GitHub repository to Lagoon, create a Lagoon account, create a project, you click deploy, and off you go. But there's obviously more than that way of running our WebOps platform specifically. So, you know, we've got the platform as a service. That's easy to understand. Toby, could you speak a bit to the other ways of running the WebOps platform and how Amazy.io can be adopted?
Yeah, this is obviously sort of the opposite angle to the use case I just spoke about, where you've got an organization who wants that level of involvement in the infrastructure they're running, but still doesn't want to go fully deep on building a deployment infrastructure for their sites. The way Lagoon itself is architected is it has a centralized core, and it has the ability to talk to multiple remotes. In Amazy.io's case, there's cloud remotes hosted in a number of regions on a number of providers around the world, and they're managed and maintained by Amazy.io. The settings are all there. It's all fairly easy. You can deploy your website, as you say, add your Git repository, do some paperwork, and off you go. There's the extension of that is where you've got an organization who wants to support their site or their customers, but they need slightly different things. They need to be able to customize backups. They need to be able to customize their logging. They need to be able to ensure data sovereignty. These are all things that are really important to some clients. So there's the ability with Lagoon to do that, to effectively bring your own cluster to the Amazy.io Lagoon. And you can, basically, it still runs on whoever your provider is, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, or any other certified Kubernetes. You deploy that into an individual dedicated cluster that then communicates back with Lagoon. But your sites are deployed into your cluster. Your backups are managed inside your cluster. So you set your retention periods, you set your schedules. If you've got particular needs, and a number of our customers do, to be able to retain information for a certain period of time. If you need to duplicate your logs to a different system, if you need to store your logs in storage for a certain period of time, that's all configurable at that cluster level. So you can still utilize the main Lagoon install to do your build and deploy, but as it does the build and deploy, it talks to the local configuration and operates that local configuration. So you can really tailor the workloads specifically for your needs. So where you've got an IT team that is more involved, that wants more engagement, that has more requirements, there's certainly the dedicated offering is a much better option there. It still allows Amaze.io to manage the Lagoon install and bring all those new features as they roll out, but you're responsible for hosting your own sites.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, and we're running out of time a bit. Blaze, you and I have been working on and off with open source software, working with it like since the early 2000s, I guess. And Toby, I'm 90% sure your story is going to be similar. So Blaze, maybe from your perspective first, you've gone from web development and a web developer to working on the tooling around WebOps stuff, and and still doing a lot of development. Interested to hear what it's like working on an open source project, particularly from an open source perspective. Working on a project like this and the experience you bring from it, and what you see as being the benefits of the tool being open source.
Well, I mean, I think that other than it being personally very rewarding, because if you believe in open source, then working on it is it's pretty much the best case. But I do think that the advantages from a business perspective is that, particularly in an environment where almost everything is open sourced, having this single layer, the kind of WebOps platform, also being open sourced and being available to be scrutinized, be available to be installed, as and where you would like it to be installed. I mean, Lagoon itself as an open source platform is not something that you need IO for. I mean, of course, we're the experts at it, but there are people out there that are running their own Lagoon. I think that this is a very compelling, aspect of the product, that it's transparent all the way through. There are no hidden bits. There's no magic, and that makes it, firstly, more open for the community themselves to help drive the direction that we build it, as well as just generally being more secure. We have more eyes on it. That's one of the major advantages of open source software. So yeah, I would say that those are the major aspects of it.
Before I ask you, Toby, to give us a little bit of history of the open source tooling, the other thing that I would add to what you said there, Blaze, is the open web is an important thing, that we've all spoken about for a long time, and it's continuously under some kind of sort of threat of whether it be from centralization or big social media platforms, these kinds of things. So for me, having everything open, like you say, that transparency all the way down, is super important, not only for government. I mean, government, obviously, that's why there's such adoption of the Drupal project and these kinds of things, in governments, but also increasingly more for commercial and corporate organizations. Being able to have a transparency layer that is still secure, I think is an incredibly compelling proposition.
Well,
so Toby,
I mean, definitely. I mean, just to add to that, I think that's exactly right. There's no vendor lock-in when it comes to Lagoon. I mean, and I think that is a really important point. From a business perspective, we just actually cannot hold you to ransom. And that is, I think, a real virtue.
Yep.
There's obviously, there's a number of services that Lagoon uses or provides, but we often say it takes no more than an hour or so to Lagoonize a site. The inverse is true. Blaze says vendor lock-in. You can take your site off Lagoon and you can install it on an Apache stack. If you want to, you could probably make it work with a number of other providers relatively easily. That puts a lot of onus on the offering to be solid. You've got the transparency of code. You've got the transparency of the freedom of movement. A lot of the SaaS platforms don't have that. If you build your site or build your application using one of the SaaS platforms, you have to rebuild to move it somewhere else. That's something that as an open source organization, we don't believe in at all. We believe that you should be able to move. You might need to make some modifications, you might miss out on some goodies, but by and large, you could be up and running somewhere else in a matter of hours, and that keeps us on our toes.
Mm-hmm. So Toby, I wasn't fully involved in the actual decision to open source Lagoon. I can't remember if you were in the company when that was happening or whether you were still in the GovCMS side. But maybe you could speak a bit to the history of that decision and kind of historically, and then also projecting forward. What's the planning around the open source side? Where do you see it being from an open source perspective in the coming months or years?
So yeah, the decision to open source Lagoon does predate me slightly, but it's the thing that attracted me the most to Lagoon, the tool, to Amaze.io, the company. Lagoon was built to service our partner companies' hosting needs originally, but it did such a good job of that, and the ethos of the team at that time, and still the ethos of the team, is so open source. If you drew up a pro and con list versus open sourcing, I doubt there would have been many cons in there at all. It was just the obvious thing to do. And that's kind of the way we've lived development since then. I think it was 4.5 years ago, that Lagoon was open sourced. Most elements of the Amaze.io platform are open sourced. We open source everything we can. The certain elements, the way we build some of our infrastructure, we're not going to open source our Terraform plans, but we will happily work with people to make them understand better. And I think one of the things that Blaze touched on is that Lagoon doesn't need Amaze.io to run. It's one of the things I love about it. We discover regularly people that have built and deployed Lagoon themselves to test it out, to see how it works. We only notice when they start submitting pull requests against our repositories and say, hey, I've noticed that you can't do this because of this setting. And we're like, I don't know who you are, but thank you. Thank you. So it means that these people are out there, they're running this tool, they're trying to make it better, and they also share the same vision. They want to contribute back the same way that we, like Lagoon, is stood on the shoulders of other open source giants, where we identify things that we can feed back to them. We work with our upstream. We love it when our users feed back to us. There's a number of features in Lagoon now that were contributed by partners, by users, by developers. That gives us such joy, A, because we don't have to write it ourselves, but B, because we're seeing that other people are as invested in this ecosystem as we are. So to take this forward, we're looking at what open source best practice looks like for essentially a project. And over the last couple of years, Lagoon and Amaze.io have been working on how to identify Lagoon as a project and try and separate out the two elements a little bit, so that Amaze.io is that bundled hosting offering. If we went back to that first slide, Amaze.io does the AWS Azure work, it does the Kubernetes work, it does the Lagoon work, but it also provides the application support, it provides the WAF CDN, that entire offering, that whole WebOps stack. Lagoon is just a layer in that stack. It's just another tool. It's just another thing that sits on top of Kubernetes. So really trying to identify the whole service offering versus the individual product. And for those that are following us closely, we have applied to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for incubation as a sandbox project, basically to look how we can take our governance of our project onto the next level. So whilst we will still be Amaze.io, will still be founded and primarily developed by Amaze.io, to be able to harness the inputs from these other organizations, these other partners, these other users, to give them the level of open source comfort that they require to make a large investment. If they're going to set up a developer full-time to help with their Lagoon customizations, they want the reassurance that it's not going to be absorbed into our intellectual property if we suddenly decide that Lagoon is actually closed source. We want to be able to give those external contributors the comfort. So we're looking to the CNCF to apply to be a sandbox. We're still awaiting an outcome there, but the idea is having an independent governance model underpinning Lagoon will give more people more comfort in developing for it.
That's really cool.
So if you check out the Lagoon site, we run a number of things. We're on community hours. We've got independent discussion forums and things where we'd encourage anybody who's interested in working out how to contribute to reach out to us. We'll try and help them.
What's the best way? The lagoon.sh website?
Lagoon.sh website, or check out github.com/uselagoon.
Nice, wonderful. So I think we're running very short on time. Thank you both for the contributions and the conversation. I think this was really super cool. For anybody listening in, thanks a lot for listening. Hopefully this gave you some food to chew on around what WebOps is. And yeah, see you all in the next webinar.